The gavel struck like a gunshot. "Counselor, this is not some street corner in a dark neighborhood. Control yourself." Those words shattered me inside. How dare he try to humiliate my origin? It was then I swore on my poor mother's name. He would pay dearly for this. The entire courtroom trembled. He knew how to project his voice. The judge was an actor dressed in robes. Every word was a blade. And, as always, the laughter followed. First from his clerks, then the prosecutors, then the spectators in the back. Dirty laughter, like a trained audience. My client, in handcuffs, took a deep breath. The metallic clink of the chains seemed to mock along with them. He didn't dare look at me. He lowered his head, hunched his shoulders. It was like watching a building collapse in silence. "Look at this," the judge continued. "Feels like a Mexican soap opera. All that's missing is the dramatic music to match her defense." His laugh echoed, thick, heavy, cruel. I stood motionless, but inside my whole body burned. It felt like red-hot iron had been shoved down my throat. I wanted to scream, to throw my papers to the floor, but no. Since childhood I'd learned, whoever swallows silence learns to turn it into a weapon. At that moment, it wasn't just my client being judged. It was me, my family, everything I carried with me. And he didn't know it yet, but he had already lost. He loved to repeat that I was a neighborhood lawyer, as if that were an insult, as if coming from the bottom were something to be ashamed of. I am the daughter of a bricklayer and a seamstress. I remember the sound of cement pounding in a tin can, the constant hum of the sewing machine cutting through the night. My father came home with bleeding hands, worn-out knees, but an unbroken dignity. My mother stitched dresses for parties she would never attend. I grew up surrounded by sweat and silence. That's where I learned the first law: whoever makes a promise keeps it. Whoever makes a mess cleans it. And there, in court, I saw the opposite. Justice was not blind. It was selective. It only saw surnames. It only saw money. And when it didn't, it pretended. This case was a caricature of it all. My client, a bricklayer, accused of homicide in a bar. Fragile evidence, witnesses contradicting themselves at every sentence. On the other side, the businessman's son. Expensive suit, luxury lawyer, posture of a saint. The judge treated him like a beloved nephew. Smiles, complicit glances. "This trial will be quick," the judge said loudly for all to hear. "A poor scapegoat is always perfect." They laughed as if it were a salon joke. My client tugged at my arm discreetly, his voice breaking. "Counselor, I didn't kill anyone." I looked into his eyes. I saw fear, I saw shame, I saw despair, and I answered, firm, almost whispering, "I know, but he will pay." And in that moment, I was no longer just a lawyer. I was the daughter of the seamstress and the bricklayer, carrying all their fury. I began observing every detail. A predator does not reveal itself in the roar, but in the routine. And I saw his routine. The judge separated cases into invisible piles. The rich, the friends, the poor, the disposable. His eyes shifted with each pile. For the rich, smiles. For the poor, contempt. For friends, complicity. For the disposable, haste. And then I noticed it. The camera in his chamber. Always off, always under maintenance. A dead eye. I casually asked a guard about it. He laughed. Just for show. Never worked. Right then, I knew. What seemed like nothing was everything. The place where he felt untouchable, where he believed no one could see him, would become the place where he would be exposed. I bought a tiny recorder. Discreet, invisible. I studied his routine. Coffee at 10 a.m., a phone call at 6 p.m., papers always in the same corner of the desk. I returned to his office with a meaningless petition. While he spoke to me as if I were a child, I slid the recorder inside a heavy envelope and left it behind a dusty code of law. I walked out calm, like dust finding a crack. That night, I pressed play. The sound filled my room. First, chairs scraping, glasses clinking, muffled laughter. Then, his voice, clear, arrogant. "Relax, counselor. The businessman's son won't see a day in prison. I found the perfect scapegoat. Poor, nameless, Quick and clean. My heart froze. My breath failed. My hands trembled. And then a smile was born. He had just dug his own grave, and I was already holding the shovel. Evidence is like the tide. One wave isn't enough. The water has to return, insist, wear down the stone. I went back to his chambers at different times, always with some minor excuse. A filing, a clarification, a forgotten document. The recorder shifted places like stubborn dust, behind a dusty legal code, inside an unlabeled folder, under the box of paperclips. I smiled politely. He explained things slowly, as if I were a child, and the room, a silent accomplice, drank in every word he uttered. On those nights, I would lie in my dark room, staring at the ceiling, and press play. At first, the domestic noises of power, glasses clinking, silverware, laughter from throats too full, faint bar music leaking from a phone. Then, what I sought. This one's getting a heavy sentence just to set an example. Here, whoever pays doesn't cry. The forensic report? We guide it. A glossary of cynicism. I wrote it all down, dated, time-stamped, noting even smells and atmospheres. Rain tapping the window, a distant car horn, the cough of an aide I recognized by his rasp. Between recordings, life went on. I went to see my client in jail. His 8-year-old daughter handed me a drawing. A house with 2 windows, a huge sun, and a man smiling at the door. That's my daddy when he comes home. I nearly collapsed right there, my knees buckling. The hug she gave me smelled of cheap soap and old hope. I walked out of the prison with one certainty. It wasn't enough to free him. I had to restore his name, washed clean like clothes on a line in the sun. I began stitching together a dossier like a patchwork quilt. Each patch had its own texture. Transcripts stamped with hours, screenshots of schedules, snippets of the judge plotting questions with the prince lawyer, lists of businessmen's nicknames that always came up when the word sentence appeared. For safety, I built redundancies. An external hard drive hidden at a neighbor's house who asked no questions. Another encrypted copy in the cloud. Sealed envelopes with instructions in case something happened to me. Not paranoia, instinct. Instinct of someone who learned young that power sweeps away tracks. I also asked 2 trusted friends, a relentless journalist and a neighborhood IT guy who fixed half the community's computers, to check parts of the material without seeing the whole. Just tell me if the time matches the cell tower, I told him. Just tell me if the background noise sounds like a cheap bar, I told her. Both confirmed what my gut already knew. The tide was rising, and amid it all came the veiled threats. A black car parked too long at the corner of my office, the doorbell ringing at midnight with no one outside, an anonymous note on my gate. For your own good, stop now. I didn't stop. When fear pressed in, I remembered the little girl's drawing and my father laying bricks with raw hands. I steadied myself and pressed play again. File 33. The key. The judge spoke of the club, with the ease of someone asking for more ice. In File 41, an aide asked, "And the report? Do we clean it up?" File 47, numbers. File 52, a promise of acquittal, with a ready-made narrative. In the dead of night, silence cutting through me, I sat in the kitchen and cried quietly, without sobs, the most dangerous kind of tears, the ones that turn into blades. Then I wiped my face with my sleeve, pulled the chair back, and wrote in large letters in my notebook. Stage, light, witness. The plan was no longer just legal, it was theatrical. I would make the entire city listen. I circled a date on the calendar with red ink, like a farmer marking the harvest after months of sowing. The tide was ready to swallow his sandcastle. All that was left was choosing the exact moment the wave would crash. And it would crash hard. I chose the final hearing the way you choose the climax of a film, not by chance. A big case, natural spotlights, reporters sniffing for blood, too many people present to pretend nothing happened. I filed a cold, formal request for transparency, broadcast in the next room, public access, press admitted in a designated area. The judge signed without a thought, as vain as ever. Vanity is bait that glitters. I turned my preparation into a ritual. I reviewed each recording with my eyes closed, learning to recognize what came before and after by the rhythm of his breath. I organized the files into numbered envelopes, sealed with tape, 14, 19, 33, 41, 52, like loaded cartridges. I printed key excerpts with date, time, and sensory details. Sound of glass, saxophone music in the background, office door slamming. I prepared a primary flash drive and 2 backups. At home, on the table, I aligned everything as if sharpening blades. On the eve, I opened my mother's wardrobe. She's gone now, but the smell of soap and waxed thread remained. I chose an old blazer she had tailored for me when I landed my first case. Adjusted the sleeve. She always said the cuff at the right length was self-respect. Inside, I sewed a small piece of fabric from her apron. Amulet, armor, history stitched to my skin. I tied my hair with the tape my father used to measure walls, a gesture no one would see, but one that reminded me where my straight line came from. I called the journalist friend. "Tomorrow, be in the hallway. If it goes wrong, you publish everything." She sighed. "If it goes right, I'll publish even more." I called the IT guy. "If I say time to clean, you dump the files in the public cloud with timestamps." He replied short. "Already set." I reached out to 2 grassroots organizations that monitor abuses of power, people who don't get intimidated by expensive suits, and invited them to observe the session. I messaged neighbors and community leaders who knew the bricklayer by name, not as a headline. I turned the hearing into a public square. On the morning of the date circled in red, the city seemed to hold its breath. The courthouse smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. Journalists set up tripods in the hallway. Law students whispered with shining eyes. Mothers carrying grocery bags asked shyly if they could watch just a little. I returned discreet looks and half smiles, but inside my palms sweated cold. Fear never leaves. You just learn to walk with it. When my client arrived, the rattle of his chains sang again. He looked at me with the eyes of a wounded animal that still doesn't believe the gate could open. "Today you just listen," I told him, touching his shoulder. He nodded, not understanding, which was good. Genuine surprise can't be rehearsed. The judge entered like he always did, a peacock, robes cutting a path, cologne trying to tame the air, a smile trained for the cameras. He greeted the Prince lawyer like family, passed me as if stepping over a crack. He noticed, but pretended it wasn't there. "Let's end this without theater, shall we?" he sneered. "Of course, Your Honor," I replied, and felt the fabric at my cuff squeeze my wrist, my mother tightening her grip to keep me steady. In the back row, the little girl with the house drawing appeared, holding her mother's hand. I nearly crumbled inside. I breathed through my ribs, the way my father taught me when the weight of concrete threatened to break your spine. "Plant your feet," he used to say. I planted them, and I made a silent promise. Today, the city breathes on the right side again. Everything was in place. People, cameras, silence clinging to the ceiling. The trap had been set for weeks. All that was left was to pull the lever, and I would wait for the exact second when he raised the gavel, the peacock's favorite gesture, to ask for the floor. The sound would fall on his head like a rotten ceiling. I could almost hear the wood cracking. He began his usual ritual, adjusted the robe, checked his watch, flashed a half smile at the prince, cleared his throat, ready for the final act. "If the defense is done with theater, we'll move on to sentencing." The gavel rose. My moment. "Your Honor, with the court's permission," I said, my voice biting its own tongue not to tremble. "There is evidence you insist on ignoring. It is of public interest." Contained laughter, the cruelest kind, because it wants to be born, but can't. He tilted his chin, indulgent, like an impatient priest. "Another of your inventions? Let's not waste time." "Let's not," I replied, connecting the flash drive to the audio system with the delicacy of lighting a match in a closed room. "Play, file 14. The air shifted temperature. First, the clink of ice against glass, faint music. Then his voice, without robe, without echo, just the raw flesh of his voice. "This poor guy makes the perfect scapegoat. The businessman pays me on time. No problem." The words hung in the air like dirty laundry on a makeshift clothesline. No one breathed. A journalist dropped his pen and didn't stoop to pick it up. The bailiff fixed his eyes on his own shoes as if discovering his soles had melted. "Fake!" the prince blurted, choking on his tie. The judge flushed red beneath his tan. "Illegally obtained," he barked, but the bark came toothless. "The illegality lies in the conduct, not the mirror," I said, and even I was surprised at the strength of my own voice. It came from the base of my spine, where my father planted his feet. The files have timestamps, ambient noise, cross-checks with official calls, and independent verification. I raised the numbered pages, shaking only on the inside. Play. File 19. The corner store camera doesn't pick up anything. Leave it. The room shifted as if a wave had swept through the doors. Because everyone in the neighborhood knew about that camera reflecting in the glass. The detail he had chosen to ignore. From the back, the little girl's mother pressed her lips tight, and I heard, without hearing, a swallowed sob. He tried his usual trick, the one that always worked. This lawyer fabricates narratives. I breathed slowly and pushed the last lever. Narrative is what you built. This is chronology. On a makeshift screen, I projected the timeline. Dates, clips, overlapping background noises, mentions of meetings that matched his public schedule. And like pulling a sheet off a body everyone pretended not to see, I revealed the inverted mirror. Part of the material had been carelessly synced, in his arrogance, to his personal email, connected to the office computer. The room shuddered, vanity biting its own tail. The council's representative, sitting quietly until then, adjusted his glasses and said without raising his voice, "Proceed." I proceeded. Play, file 33. Tell the club the package is the same. 3 letters everyone knew, but pretended not to. The corridor outside turned into a sea. Footsteps, whispers, the dry buzz of dozens of phone notifications. The judge lifted the gavel, but his hand wouldn't obey. The gesture froze halfway. Ridiculous. The symbol had become just an object, and an object protects no one. I looked at my client. He was crying silently, not from fear, but from the first taste of relief. I touched his shoulder again and whispered, "Breathe." The room was breathless, and with my finger still on the button, I said simply, "There's more." And there was. File 33 was still echoing when someone in the back of the room whispered, "The club." Silence. Then a murmur, like wind sneaking through window cracks. The club. 3 letters the whole city knew, but no one dared to say out loud. It was synonymous with black cars with tinted windows, million-dollar contracts signed in silence, businessmen who seemed untouchable, and now it was synonymous with him, the judge who laughed at me. He made one last desperate attempt, his voice trembling. "This is slander. She made all this up." But before he could continue, I played file 41. An aide asked, "And the report? Do we clean it up?" And his voice, chuckling low, "Clean it. Make it disappear. No one will notice." The mask cracked. The audience rippled with murmurs. Journalists typed without looking at their screens. The Justice Council's representative raised his hand, cutting off the judge's pathetic attempt to explain. "Evidence will be collected immediately." The businessman's lawyer had gone pale as paper. He tried to whisper something, but the room no longer belonged to them. It was ours. It was the people's, the ones who had always swallowed silence. Outside, protesters held up improvised signs. "Justice is not for sale." Inside, the judge, once a peacock, shrank into his own robe. The man who thought himself a god now looked like a lost ghost, sweating cold beneath the lights. And I still hadn't shown the evidence that would clear my client. The final blade was about to turn. I raised my hand. "Your Honor, before any sentence, the truth you tried to erase must be seen." I projected the image from the corner store's camera. At first glance, it seemed useless, just a side view of the street. But when the expert zoomed in, the reflection in a window captured 2 men running on the night of the crime. 2 men, neither with the height nor the build of my client. People leaned forward. The judge muttered hoarsely, "Irrelevant. Play. File 19. His own voice. "The corner store camera doesn't catch anything. Leave it." The courtroom reacted like an audience at a movie plot twist. Nervous laughter, gasps, muffled shouts. My client's mother, seated in the back, covered her mouth and cried silently. His daughter, the same one who had given me the drawing of a house, clung to her mother's leg, not understanding, but feeling something enormous was happening. I showed bus receipts. I showed his time card at work. I showed a phone record, a call to his mother at 8:13 p.m., the exact time of the crime from miles away, all cross-checked with cell tower logs. What the judge had called a detail was now a fortress. My client wept quietly, not from fear, from freedom beginning to be born. I looked at him and said, "Today, you breathe free." And in that instant, I realized vengeance was not mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been treated as invisible. The Justice Council wasted no more time. "Your Honor, in light of the material presented, you are hereby suspended immediately. All rulings signed in the last 5 years will be reviewed." The judge tried to raise the gavel, but his hand wouldn't obey. He trembled. The gavel fell to the ground, echoing like a stone dropped into an open grave. The entire courtroom witnessed the god in robes lose his scepter. "This is a circus!" he screamed, but his voice came out thin, ridiculous. "I'm the victim of persecution. This lawyer just wants fame." No one believed him, because everyone had heard, everyone had seen. The entire city was standing, watching the fall in real time. The peacock had been stripped of his feathers. The king was naked. 2 security officers approached, not as guardians, but as jailers. He was led out the back door, handcuffed, his robe dragged across the floor, filthy, too heavy for the small body now revealed. Every step was filmed, broadcast, immortalized. My client was freed on the spot. His shackles fell with a metallic clink that sounded like church bells. He looked at me, crying like a child. His daughter ran to him, hugging him, repeating, "Daddy, Daddy." I knew it. I took a deep breath. Vengeance was complete, but the domino effect had only just begun. That very night, before the judge even slept in his cell, the entire city was already awake with the news. Headlines erupted like gunshots. Judge tied to the club suspended. Recordings reveal sale of sentences. Poor convicted, rich acquitted, scheme uncovered. The recordings spread through WhatsApp groups, local radio, TV programs. Every phrase of his, every laugh, every cynical confession became an echo. "This poor guy makes the perfect scapegoat." That line burned like a tattoo on the city's skin. Those who once bragged of being his friends began to vanish. The aide who used to laugh loudly at his jokes never showed up at court again. The prosecutor who patted him on the back now gave interviews saying, "I always suspected something." The secretary disappeared into thin air. It was as if the robe had turned into a curse. Whoever touched it, burned. And the cases? An entire line began to be reopened. Young men who had lost years in prison, mothers who had wept for sons unjustly locked away, widows who never had a chance at defense. Now, every sentence signed by him was a stain. The god in robes had turned into a corpse of reputation. And unlike the dead, who rest, he would live each second of his own public decomposition. But his poison did not die with him. It was spilling onto his accomplices. And the city wanted symbolic blood, not physical, but reputational. The domino effect had only just begun. 2 days later, city walls were covered in graffiti. "Justice is not for sale." The club, once whispered in fancy restaurants, had become a public curse word. Businessmen who once smiled in cafes disappeared. Lawyers who lived off flattering the judge now crossed the street to avoid being recognized. One of the city's most powerful businessmen was arrested trying to board a flight to Cancun. Another, a construction magnate, was caught destroying documents. Every morning, another head rolled. Not because I demanded it, but because truth, once exposed, never returns to the drawer. My small office became a place of pilgrimage. Reporters knocked at the door. Families arrived with folders of cases. Young lawyers called me the people's lawyer. I was no longer invisible. I was the blade that cut open the fabric of the lie. And my client? He went home. The whole neighborhood welcomed him with an improvised celebration. Fireworks, music, neighbors bringing food. His daughter ran down the street with the drawing of the house in her hands, shouting, "My dad is back!" He hugged me, crying, "You gave me my life back." I didn't answer. I just held him tight. Because deep down, I knew I hadn't just given his life back. I had given back hope to an entire neighborhood, to all the people who had always believed justice was for the rich alone. But there was still one scene left, the one every villain fears, the useless apology, and it was coming. The image swept across the country. The judge, now the ex-judge, seated before the disciplinary commission. No robe, no audience of flatterers, no gavel, just a man in a wrinkled suit, trembling hands, red eyes. He tried to hold on, tried to claim political persecution, tried to say he was the victim of a setup, tried to drag my name through the mud. This neighborhood lawyer wanted fame. She made everything up. No one believed him, because everyone had heard his own voice. They had seen his own reflection in the recordings. There was no escape. So he turned to the last refuge of the weak, false repentance. If I erred, it was only in trying to protect the institution. Dry laughter echoed. Not laughter of flattery, but of contempt. Outside, protesters shouted, "Prison instead of robes!" Journalists broadcast live. Old allies hid in beach houses. The businessman's lawyer had vanished without leaving an address. And he, the man who once mocked me in front of everyone, was now a national joke, a ghost dressed in failure. I didn't need to say a word. The stitching was already complete, but I knew one final knot was still missing. The judge did not fall alone. He dragged down with him everyone who had laughed alongside him. The first to fall was the businessman who had financed political campaigns. Police raided his mansion at 6 a.m, cameras broadcasting live as luxury cars were covered with tarps, safes were cracked open, and misplaced contracts were pulled from drawers. The whole city watched. Then came the silk-tie lawyer, the one who always smiled at the judge like an obedient son. Now he appeared in leaked videos, nervous, delivering envelopes in restaurants. What had once been whispered secrets in back rooms turned into primetime police drama. And it didn't stop there. Overpriced construction projects were halted. Multi-million-dollar bids became targets of investigation. Businessmen began turning on each other. The domino effect, each piece toppling the next, until the entire castle crumbled. Meanwhile, the people, the very same people the judge had always ignored, took to the streets. Not out of hatred, but out of catharsis. For the first time, they felt that a powerful man had fallen. Protesters held up signs with my name, something that tied a knot in my throat. Not because I sought it, but because I understood. My fight was no longer mine alone. The house of cards was on fire, and I, once treated as invisible, was now seen by everyone. The ex-judge, lost in his own ruin, tried one last pathetic act. From inside prison, he sent letters to journalists claiming he was the victim of a political conspiracy. He tried to accuse forensic experts, tried to accuse me of hacking, tried to turn his downfall into a performance of innocence. But it didn't stick, because against him, there was too much. Audio, images, witnesses, dates, and the cruelest of all, his own voice, played again and again on radio shows, in viral videos across social media. He could deny, but he could not silence the echo of himself, and it was in that echo that he drowned. The man who once used laughter to crush others was now crushed by the people's laughter. A different laughter, not of flattery, but of scorn. The peacock had become a punchline. Meanwhile, families who had once cried in silence now knocked at the door of my tiny office. "Review our case, counselor. He condemned my son too. Please help my sister." My office turned into an improvised sanctuary. Humble people arrived with plastic bags stuffed with documents, as if carrying treasure. And in truth, they were. They carried the chance to begin again. And me? I took a deep breath with each new face, feeling the weight of carrying not just a case, but a multitude. I was no longer just a lawyer. I was a symbol, and symbols cannot falter. The day of the press conference arrived. Lights, cameras, microphones. They asked me, "Counselor, how did you manage to face someone so powerful?" I could have spoken of sleepless nights, of fear knocking at my door in the form of black cars, of trembling hands when I pressed play for the first time, but I didn't. I spoke of my mother. She always said, Whoever sews with dirty thread will one day get tangled in it. I looked at the cameras and added, he called me invisible, but invisible was the truth he tried to bury. And truth, sooner or later, always finds eyes. Silence. Then, applause. Not applause of a show, but applause of relief, as if the city had finally released a weight stuck in its throat for decades. The ex-judge was condemned not only for corruption, but for being the very symbol of rot. His name became a collective scar. And I, the daughter of a bricklayer and a seamstress, the lawyer he once called a joke, walked out not as a heroine, but as a reminder. No one is ever too small when the truth stands at their side. The man who once made the courtroom tremble now spent his days in silence inside a cold cell. No more gavel, no more audience, only moldy walls, an iron bed, and the echo of his own voice. A voice he had, without realizing it, handed over for the entire world to hear. Some inmates recognized him. Look at that! The judge who sold verdicts. Others laughed. The man who laughed at everyone had now become a punchline, even among thieves. He, who once mocked my defense as a Mexican soap opera, was now the main character of a primetime drama. No robe could cover the shame. And the worst part wasn't losing his position. It was losing respect. His family abandoned him. Former allies turned informants. Businessmen treated him like dead weight. He, who thought himself a god, now tasted the bitter truth of being nothing but dust. Meanwhile, I received a flood of messages of support. Gracias, abogada. Thank you for speaking for us. Voices in Spanish, voices in English, voices from people who had never felt represented. And in that moment, I understood. It was never just about one judge. It was about an entire system that had always laughed at those without money. His fall opened cracks that could no longer be patched. The club dissolved. Businessmen turned themselves in, hoping for deals. Local politicians, once photographed at his side, were dragged into investigations. Contracts were annulled, bids redone. On TV, experts said, "This case will change the history of the judiciary." In the streets, the phrase was simpler. Even a judge can fall. It became the mantra repeated in markets, buses, public squares. The feeling was new, almost strange, that the people had defeated a giant. And the most beautiful part was the transformation in the eyes of my client's daughter. Before, fear. Now, light. She ran through the streets, showing the drawing she had given me weeks earlier. Only now she had redrawn it, her father smiling for real, herself at his side, and me, in a suit, holding a giant scale of justice. "This is the lawyer who brought my dad back," she told the neighbors. And that's when I realized, vengeance, when done right, doesn't end with the fall of the enemy. It spreads, multiplies, and becomes collective hope. At the final hearing on the case, they asked me for closing words. I didn't look at the cameras. I looked at the empty bench where he once sat. I looked at the space where he had so often laughed at me, and I said, he called me invisible, but invisible was the very justice he tried to sell. Today, the whole country saw it, and those who sell verdicts forget. Truth has no price. Silence, then applause, not just in the room, outside too, on the street, in the neighborhood, across the city. Applause not for me, but for the idea that no one, no matter how high they stand, can trample others without consequence. The judge became the past, became a lesson, became a collective scar. And I remained in my small office, but now with an enormous certainty. I would never again be invisible. Because when justice falls silent, truth screams. And I had made sure the microphone was on.